Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your hosts, Michael Baleka.
And Molly Kilty. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your hosts, Molly and Mike. Mike, this episode is going to be kind of a lot of fun. We talked a lot about psych-soc last episode, and specifically how can we increase our score in psych-soc given that it's the last section of the test, given that ultimately it tests material in a very different way compared to the other sciences, and of course different from cars. Although less different than you may think.
But we used to be, but yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And now we get to dive into, I think, one of my favorite psych-soc topics, which is all about learning and conditioning. This one I feel like applies a lot to your daily life. So it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of break down how it will be tested, but also how you can use this knowledge to actually help shape your studying.
Right. I know last time when we talked about psych-soc, a big thing that we hit on was like when we're learning these terms, when we're learning these ideas, to be like taking into our own lives, like how does this apply to my own life? And I think, like you said before, this is just one of those areas that I think is most applicable because we're talking about how do we learn? How do we learn behaviors? How do we learn reactions to stimuli? And once we understand these things, we can leverage them in our own life. Like once we understand why we act the way that we do to certain things, we can kind of take control of it and be like, wait, well, if I know these things are paired, well, maybe I can just change that pairing. I can change it to something else. And so it's really, really cool where, yes, it's testable MCAT material. We need to know it. Cool. But it's also really powerful stuff because this stuff is real. This stuff is true. And if we learn it, we can apply to our own lives. So very, very exciting stuff. So like if we think about like why we salivate when we, smell food or why we check our phone and dopamine hits, that's all conditioning. Yeah. That was our insane.
That's conditioning. Boom.
So I guess I think a natural place to start when talking about learning and conditioning is kind of where I think most places start, which is classical conditioning. And classical conditioning, I think, whenever we think classical conditioning, I don't know about you, Molly, I think about Pavlov. I'm thinking about the dogs. I'm thinking about salivating. But before we dive into that example, I think it's important that we talk about key terms, key things we need to know before we actually dive into the example. And so the core concept is we are pairing something that is not trained to something something that's neutral to something that's not trained. So we have what's called an unconditioned stimulus. So an unconditioned stimulus means this is something that we respond to, without prior training. So for example, when I smell food, I will salivate. That's just me because that's just how my body reacts. It's getting ready to eat. My unconditioned stimulus is salivating. So that's knowing
unconditioned response.
Oh, sorry. My unconditioned stimulus is the smell of the food. Thank you, Molly. The unconditioned
I'm just picturing you just.
No, I'm just salivating. I'm just drooling. Absolutely. So my unconditioned stimulus, right, is the food. That's the thing. I didn't have to be trained to do that. Like that's just what happens. And my unconditioned response, because I didn't have to train that, is the salivating. So for any classical conditioning example, we have an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response to that stimulus. Then we have what's called a neutral stimulus, right? And this is one that is just, I don't normally respond to that thing. So a great example would be a bell. When I hear a bell, I don't really do anything. I hear the bell, great, but that doesn't cause anything to happen to me. I don't get a response. And so we have our unconditioned stimulus. We have our unconditioned response, right? Food and salivating. Then we have our neutral stimulus. But then our goal is to pair that neutral stimulus to an unconditioned stimulus. And so we want to turn that neutral stimulus into a conditioned stimulus. So I want to turn that thing that I used to not respond to into something I now respond to, right? And that we're going to turn that now that I'm responding to into the conditioned response. And so these I think 5 things I mentioned: unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, neutral stimulus, conditioned response, are kind of embodied by Pavlov's dog, right? And I kind of like really tried to like those things that I were mentioning are the Pavlov dog examples. So Molly, take me through like what happened with Pavlov and these dogs. I'm sure most people, if they've taken an intro psych or started these, have heard of this dog before.
Yeah, especially if you're a dog lover, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the famous example of classical conditioning, right? In classical conditioning, just as a heads up, it's all about learning that there's an association between stimuli. Okay, so with Pavlov, basically what this individual, this researcher realized is, hey, if I give a dog, or if I put food in front of a dog, the dog's going to salivate. If I put food in front of Mike, he's going to drool all over the place. We've learned
All over
these
the place.
things.
As you can see, it's a mess. It's not a good look.
This is something, and I want to be super clear. When we say it's unconditioned stimulus, which triggers a response, this is instinctual, right? It's like you aren't thinking about it. It's not like, ooh, that smells good. I'm going to choose to activate right
My
salivation. No, no,
salivary glands, yeah.
it is a completely natural response. Okay, so this is a common example with food and then some sort of hunger response like salivation. Okay, we then again bring in something totally random. In Pavlov's case, it actually was a bell. Okay, so Pavlov would ring a bell every time he presented food to the dogs, right? And the dogs eventually learned, hey, when I hear the bell, which was previously a neutral stimulus, dogs didn't respond to bells in any particular way. The dogs realized, hey, I'm about to get food. So they'll actually salivate in response to the bell. Okay, that would then become a conditioned stimulus, which creates a conditioned response. Conditioning, by the way, means learning. Okay, if we think of like, oh, I'm studying and I'm shoving facts in my brain, or I just had a particular interaction and I have now episodic memory, that more ties in with actually something that we talked about a couple weeks ago, memory and encoding. Okay, when we talk about learning for the MCAT, we are talking a lot about conditioning, okay, which again is some sort of association or just shaping behavior in some particular way. We're going to talk about a lot of different types of learning, but conditioning is learning. Okay, so Pavlov's dogs, again, I think it makes a lot of sense. The dog learns to, salivate in response to the bell. I know my own dogs at home, they salivate when they come home from their little walk in the morning because they know the second they come home from the walk, they start drooling. They're about to get breakfast or dinner. So it's something that we see a lot. And I want to be super clear. This is not intentional. Okay. Like you can actually take this and run with it. And you can try and classically condition yourself on purpose. But most of the time, this happens without any intention behind it, right? The dog's not like, ooh, you know what would really help me is if I learn
I
to
just start to
salivate.
drool,
It's
right?
it's unconscious, right? And this also applies to another very famous MCAT experiment, one that makes me super sad,
It's a really sad story. It's a very sad story.
which is the little Albert experiment. Okay, so Pavlov, like, it's pretty harmless to the dogs. Like, oh, hey, a bell rings, I'm about to get dinner, I salivate. It doesn't really hurt the dog. It's not really, I think,
Actually,
unethical in any
I
ways.
think the Pavlov experiment, how they trapped the saliva was actually like they did like something to the dog, like that was not ideal. As actually, I think
Okay,
there was part of it that was like not. I mean, during that time when they were doing experiments, ethics not at the same level that it was now.
fair.
So, but the idea, yeah,
Yeah.
ideally, yeah,
In comparison to little Albert, it makes me very sad.
yeah.
So, little background here, little Albert was a 9-month-old infant, okay? Tiny little baby that they basically these researchers were like, "Hey, cool, Pavlov's dogs. We learned a lot about classical conditioning. Let's see if it applies to humans too." So, what they would do, right, with little Albert, they took a unconditioned stimulus, which is a loud noise. Okay, they just banged on something really loud, which you can imagine is going to make this poor baby terrified. Okay, the baby gets scared, the baby starts crying. Okay, that's an unconditioned stimulus, which is the loud noise. And the unconditioned response is fear and crying, right? This is a 9-month-old baby. What they did is they wanted to see if they could condition the baby to associate that fear with something completely neutral, which in this case was a rat, a little white rat. Okay, that was previously neutral. The baby had no response to the rat, but during the conditioning process, they would always show the white rat when they would make the noise. And again, as you would expect, this poor baby, every time they saw or he saw a little white rat, would cry and would get so scared. Okay, which is so sad. But I think the worst part of it actually kind of opens our umbrella into a couple of other important terms, which is one called stimulus generalization. Okay, so this poor baby has been conditioned, classically conditioned, to be scared of the white rat. That becomes a conditioned stimulus. The fear and the crying when you see the white rat is the conditioned response. What they didn't expect and what they learned from this experiment is that this poor little 9-month-old infant now became terrified of anything white. Okay, it was not super specific to the white rat. Whenever the poor baby saw someone in a white lab coat or white walls or white anything, the baby would cry. Okay, we have just traumatized this infant. White, this color is everywhere around us, and this poor baby would just get terrified. Okay, we call that stimulus generalization because we took a specific stimulus that we were responding to, and we are not just responding to that one. Okay, it wasn't just a white rat, it's also a white lab coat, it's also a white whatever else. Okay, I have generalized what I will have that conditioned response to. Okay, a wide range of stimuli. This is the opposite of what we call stimulus discrimination. Okay, this was something that I think is most clear in Pavlov's dogs, right? Like if you have the bell ring at, let's say, 20 hertz, and you present the food at when the bell rings at 20 hertz, the dog's going to respond. If you ring a bell that's at 10 hertz, just a different pitch, the dog's probably going to salivate at the beginning, may generalize their response to that stimulus. But if you never present food when you ring the bell that's 10 hertz and you only do it for 20 hertz, the dog's going to be able to discriminate. Hey, I will only respond when I hear this pitch bell. Okay, so discrimination is learning to, or being conditioned to associate a very small range of stimuli with your conditioned response versus generalization is pretty much everything. Again, I don't know about you, but it makes me so sad to think about this poor little Albert. And again, getting into an ethical discussion, this poor baby was 9 months old, right? The testing took place over a period of about 3 months, 3.5 months. And even, some of these findings, this kid actually was really sick. And they may or may not have known how sick this poor child was from the beginning. That's a major ethical question that was brought up. But I think he only lived to be 5 or 6. Okay. And it's unknown what was the problem with the little Albert and whether the experimenters knew how sick he was. But I just can't. Again, when we talk about psych-soc, we learn so much from experimentation. And some of the experiments that taught us a lot about psychology are awful.
Ethically, like, so it's not even like gray area. It's like no. This is just like based on what we know, it was awful. And actually, I think down the line I think we'll do an episode where we break down these common experiments, and so many of them like really had serious impacts on some of the responders in these surveys and these situations. Like I can already think of a few that I'm like, we learned a lot from them and we studied them, but they would not fly across an ethics board today. I can promise you that. So yeah, little Albert,
sure.
Little Albert was just one of those situations where we learned a lot, but it was awful. Should never ever happen.
Should never happen.
Yeah. And that you kind of brought up, especially when you said that like discrimination, right? When we present, different stimuli, there's also an idea that comes up that we should be aware of is the idea of extinction, because like we saw before, take Pavlov's situation. Sure, they can distinguish between 20 hertz and 10 hertz. And so maybe we trained Pavlov to be specific to 20 hertz. But let's say, right, at first we had the bell with the food stimulus. So therefore, okay, they associate the bell with the saliva and salivate. And then at first, when we just ring the bell, the dog will salivate. But eventually, right, let's say we kept on doing this. Every single day, we rang the bell, no food came out, and at first he would salivate. Eventually, if we kept on presenting the conditioned stimulus with the conditioned response without also with the paired unconditioned stimulus, eventually we'll see a situation called conditioned extinction, or what is it? Extinct. I believe we just call it extinction. But
extinction.
Extinction.
Yeah.
I believe I've seen it like the extinction of the conditioned response. Yeah, where eventually the dog will stop salivating to the bell. Right. Eventually, if we keep on just ringing it, so you can't just abuse this. They learn it once, and then you just every time you ring, it's going to salivate. Eventually, as long as that food's not presented with it, it will extinguish. And so But there's this kind of interesting that happens after we extinguish a response. So after this time, like eventually, maybe, okay, the dog stops salivating. But it's this interesting situation where you can have a situation of spontaneous recovery after like a response has kind of extinguished, where all of a sudden, like maybe a year passed, maybe you ring the bell again for Pavlov and it starts salivating again, which is such an interesting situation where like I don't even know that we know why. Well, like was it just in the back of the mind? But you can have a situation where you relearn the conditioned response, like that conditioned stimulus response, without having retraining it again, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it tends to be a pretty short time frame, especially with, I mean, it depends on the animal,
Sure.
right? Or it depends on if it's humans or whatever, but
Mhm.
like you acquire a an association, you learn that association, which by the way, that learning or conditioning process is called acquisition. That's,
Mhm.
oh, okay, I should associate my instinctual response with this previously neutral stimulus, right? I acquire that. If you abuse it and you present just the conditioned stimulus again and again, I'm going to stop responding to it because I never get the food or I never, whatever, hear the loud noise.
Mhm.
I hope little Albert experienced
Oh no.
classical extinction at some
Right.
point.
Mhm.
Poor kid.
Mhm.
And then again, if you are not exposed to it for a while, who knows, right?
Mhm.
Spontaneous recovery is super interesting. It's pretty short lived. If
Mhm.
you hear the bell once, you might start to salivate because it's just been a while since you thought about it. There's some connection in the back of your mind, which is
Yeah.
stimulated, and here you are salivating or here you are crying, right? Who knows? But it tends to be, again, very short lived. It goes
Right.
extinct very quickly. But super interesting. Definitely. There are some pretty nice diagrams that would be interesting. Plug classical conditioning into Google Images and you could find a lot of really amazing ones. Or you could go to our free psych textbook that's online. We have a bunch of amazing images in this chapter as well. Again, totally free. Little plug if you want to help kind of flesh out your psych or any section understanding. Pretty good resource. um,
Mhm.
and I would love for each of you guys to think of a way that classical conditioning affects your life. Because we
Oh
talk
yeah.
about it with the baby, we talk about it with dogs, but really this is everywhere.
Mhm.
Um, and you have experienced classical conditioning, whether you know it or not. Mike, I know
Right.
you have a particularly
I
awful example.
a very awful example, and one that was so because growing up, a great tradition me and my father had. We'd always eat mangoes together. Whenever he had a mango, he would always cut it in half, and I would get one half. He would get the other. And then one
Cute.
day, it was so cute. But then one day we had a bad mango. It was a bad mango, and I threw up as a result of this mango. It was an awful experience. And ever since that day, even the smell of a mango makes me nauseous to this day.
Mm.
And so this is a situation, awful situation, but this was a scenario of classical conditioning where I, before mangoes, was a normal, like it was a neutral thing. I didn't respond to mangoes, but then immediately when I threw up, I now paired it with this neutral stimulus. Right now, the responses now me whenever I smell a mango, I just think of throw up because those two things now in my mind, in the back of my mind, it's not a conscious thing, are just paired together, which is so sad for me because I used to love mangoes. And it's funny because this is just a special thing. It's not just me. It's just you find this just in food in general. I think there's an evolutionary reason why if you throw up to a thing, that thing's probably dangerous. Body probably doesn't want to eat that thing anymore. There's probably a good like biological reason why, but it's very, very interesting to say like, yeah, this one scenario where I ate a mango and threw up now has had this. And this was years ago. I was a kid, and it's still to this day. Those things are paired in my mind together, which is so sad for me.
Yeah.
I used to. I again. I'm sure maybe I could figure out a way if I really worked it to kind of unpair those things. But yeah, no, that's really, really sad for me. I'm gonna be honest.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike. Uh, but yeah, that is a common example. Even phobias are common examples.
Mhm.
If you have if you had a traumatic experience in a car, right? Like you were in a crash and the crash itself was so frightening, right? And
Mhm.
like being in a car is not inherently frightening, right? Like just seeing a car, pretty neutral, right? But if being in a car was associated with a crash and the fear and the trauma that's associated with that, you can therefore associate that fear and the trauma with just looking at a car. right? Phobias also are like this, right? They are classically conditioned and they test on that fairly frequently. And it brings in an interesting angle with psychology, which is exposure therapy, right? That's why sometimes psychologists will use this. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It sounds really scary, especially if this is a phobia. But the idea is let's present just the conditioned stimulus to you. Okay, so in that case, let's have you look at a car, right? You're going to experience that conditioned response, but ultimately you are not going to, you're not in danger. Looking at a car, you're not in danger the way that you would be if the car that you were in crashed, right? Like if you look at the car and you realize, hold on, I'm not in any danger to see it. Like this is not an objective instinctual situation, right? And you can actually drive that association extinct, right? That's part of the idea. Or if you're terrified of spiders, or if you're terrified of holes in walls, like again, it sounds terrible to experience this type of therapy, but that's the idea behind it, is let's drive this classically conditioned association extinct. Let's have you realize that like your response is not like officially instinctually tied to this thing that used
It's
to
just
be neutral,
conditioned that way.
right? That's the idea.
Right.
Pretty awful, pretty terrifying, but that's the reason why that type of therapy was developed. It's for classical conditioning to break that association. And I feel like that word we've used a couple times, it's worth mentioning. There are two types of associative learning that we talk a lot about. Okay, classical conditioning is one. And in that case, you are learning to associate two stimuli. Okay, one stimulus, the unconditioned stimulus, gives you a response biologically. Okay, and we learn to have that same biological response to another stimulus because we've paired them together. You are learning or being conditioned to associate two stimuli to the same response. Okay, when we talk about the other type of associative learning, which is operant conditioning, also conditioning, right? And this is another form of associative learning. This is all about your behavior and the consequences of your behavior. Okay, so classical conditioning, part of how I like to recognize it is you are associating two almost causes, right? It's a stimulus. It's what prompts a response, which again is completely, it's not oh, I'm going to choose to do this. No, it's instinctually programmed response. Operant conditioning is all about, I chose to behave in this way, and then I had a consequence, whether that was good or bad. I'm now learning to associate my behavior with the consequences of my behavior. So it's associative learning as well, but it's a different type of association.
Yeah, and so it's in between like different things, right? And so, and it's really cool when talking about operant conditioning because we a lot of time experience operant conditioning, like even in our colloquial language, there's kind of some types of operant conditioning that we know, like you just know from our experience with it. But a lot of times we, especially for the MCAT, we need to break down the terms and what they actually mean.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about comparing a behavior with a response. And so there are kind of two ways we can look at responses, right? Well, there is either a response that either reinforces that behavior or there are responses that punish that behavior. And
Like a
so
consequence, right?
like yeah, like not by a response as in us responding, but as in a response to the behavior, as in a consequence of the behavior. So yeah, there's either consequences of our behavior that make me want to do that behavior more, or consequences of that behavior that make me want to do that behavior less. So this is what we call reinforcement or punishment. So obviously, condition like the consequences that are reinforcements will make me want to do the behavior again. Maybe I ran on the treadmill and I felt really good after. So hey, maybe I'll want to run on the treadmill more.
Can't relate.
Can't relate. That was maybe that's never happened to me. Or maybe I ran in the house and then I slipped. Oh my goodness, that was really bad. I probably shouldn't. Yeah, I'm never gonna run in the house again. So it's these ideas where we can have reinforcements and punishments to our behaviors, which make us either want to do them more or less. I think that one's kind of like, okay, people generally understand that, but then there's this other word that we need to know what it means, which is the idea of negative and positive. Because I think a lot of them gets like mixed up between like what does negative and positive mean, reinforcement and punishment mean. When we talk about negative and positive, that means we're either adding something or taking away something. So positive means that we're adding. So Positive reinforcement means I'm adding something we really like. So that would be like, hey, I was really, really good. I did all my homework and my parents gave me candy. And I was like, yay, I'm going to keep on doing my homework. I love this. But positive punishment would be, oh, I didn't do my homework, so my parents will give me more chores. Again, positive means I'm adding something. Reinforcement or punishment means I'm either adding something that will make me want to do more of that thing, or I'm adding something that will make me want to do less of that thing. So positive is not like whether it's good or bad, I'm just adding something. So in contrast to negative. Negative, if positive is adding something, negative is taking away something. So negative reinforcement would be taking away something and which makes me want to do more of the thing. So for example, if I did really good on my test, my parents might take away some of my chores, right? I don't like chores, so it's taking away taking away something that makes me want to, reinforces my behavior. So it takes away something negative. And then while negative punishment means they're taking something away to punish that behavior. So I'm thinking, oh, they take away my TV privileges because I didn't do my homework or something. I don't know. Again, I'm just really talking about my own personal experiences in my life. Like that's like that. You're just taking like a look into like what my life has been like. That's when I was a kid. So yeah. So all of these are examples of like, and these are my examples because they're kind of personal to me, and that's how I think about these things. About the kind of the difference between negative and positive, and reinforcement and punishment. But I know, Molly, you actually were talking about this before, and you actually have a really, really interesting one that I think the AAMC kind of test, which I thought was so, so interesting.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's in the AMC or if it was somewhere else. Might have been a Jack Weston question, actually. Again, we have so many questions on our
I
website.
know.
But I think people have a pretty intuitive understanding, especially of positive reinforcement.
Right.
Like people talk about positive reinforcement. You get a gold star because you did well, right? And we all have experienced positive punishment, right? Like, hey, do your chores, or hey, you have to pay well, actually, that was a weird one. I was going to say pay a fine for doing something bad, but that takes your money away.
Money.
That would be negative punishment. Right, but it's adding something that is uncomfortable, right? Negative punishment also, I think, kind of makes sense. You take away something you want. I think negative reinforcement is the hard one for a lot of people to understand. And the one that I think of the most is actually headaches. I don't know if anyone here has this same thing, but I am someone who tends to get migraines. I work on my computer all day.
Mhm.
Jack Weston's a fully virtual company, right? So all of our classes, all of our resources are all online, which is amazing, very accessible. But I'm spending a lot of time at my computer, staring at my computer screen. It tends to give me migraines. And ultimately, even just that experience, right? I think of staring at screens, and that I'm associating with the consequence of headaches, right? That is making me not want to stare at my screen, right? You could talk about how that headache is almost a positive punishment. In that case, I'm still going to do it though, because I love working with our students. What's really interesting though, is if I take a Excedrin, if I'm experiencing an uncomfortable stimulus, which is a headache or a migraine, okay, and then I'm uncomfortable, I am having a bad time. If I take an Excedrin or some sort of pain reliever, right, or antihistamine to help, what ends up happening is my headache goes away, right? Or it might get a little bit better. Okay. When we think of how this applies to operant conditioning, we're asking, well, what was my actual behavior? Okay. I presented it in multiple cases because my behavior could be looking at a screen, or my behavior could be looking or taking a pain reliever. Okay. If we're thinking about the pain reliever, I am experiencing something uncomfortable. My action was to take an Excedrin. Okay. That action, in terms of the consequence, my headache went away. Okay, that is an example of negative reinforcement. My actual behavior taking the Excedrin is more likely to happen when I'm prompted with that stimulus again. If it helped me, next time I get a headache, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, but it's not positive. Yes, I am taking the medicine. I'm adding medicine into my system, but that's not the consequence. Okay, the consequence is what we're talking about with positive and negative. So I am, in terms of the consequence, removing something unpleasant. That is why it's negative reinforcement. I feel like this one, at least for myself, is very close to home and close to my heart, because I am someone who experiences migraines and headaches. But I also think there's value in talking about that example because it really helps us fine tune our understanding of what it means to have positive and negative. Again, it's definitely not good or bad, but it also doesn't have to do with our behavior. It's about the consequence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's what were the consequences of my behavior? That's what we're describing with positive and negative and reinforcement and punishment. So kind of cool. Well, actually not cool at all, but a good,
Not
hopefully
cool
a
at all
helpful
about
example.
headache.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a little insight to my brain.
That yeah, you saw him for me. I just get grounded for not doing, grounded and get
Gosh,
more
Mike, do your
towards.
homework,
Yeah,
dude.
I know. I was really bad with that. Trust me. But I mean, this idea of like operant conditioning, I think also calls into the kind of similar things we talk about with classical conditioning. Is while these are all methods of acquisition, I think the MCAT dives a little bit more deeper into the methods of acquisition of operant conditioning. And this is the idea of what kind of schedule did we use to reward or punish a behavior? And so we talk about kind of reinforcement schedules for these behaviors. So there's a behavior, what was the consequence of that behavior, how many times they did that behavior, etc. And so when we look at, when we're learning or they're acquiring that operant conditioning, there's kind of a few ways to look at that for reinforcement. And the first way is to look at if it was a ratio versus an interval reinforcement schedule. And what does that mean? Ratio means that there was a fixed number of times the behavior occurred before they received the consequence. So, for example, rat pulls lever 5 times before getting consequence versus interval is instead of a fixed number of behaviors before they get the consequence, it's a fixed number of time before they get the consequence. Whereas if rat pulled lever within 5 minutes, it will get cheese. They're not about number. They could have pulled it 8 times. They could have pulled it 27. They could have pulled it once. As long as they pulled it within a 5-minute time period, they are getting the cheese, right? In this way, this is the kind of first level of reinforcement where it's like, okay, how often are they getting that consequence? Mhm.
Is it a factor of the number of times you perform the behavior, or is it a factor of how long has passed since you performed the behavior? Right? That's one layer. And actually, the way that we're presenting it, we talked a lot about this all being fixed and sort of predetermined and preset, right? Like, oh, every 5 times I hit the lever, I get a food pellet. Okay,
Mhm.
it's always 5 times. If
Mhm.
I hit it 4 times, I won't get it. If I hit it 6 times, I'll get it once and I'll be 4 pushes away to the next one,
For the
right?
next
Like
one, yeah.
ratio or it being interval, right? If it's every 5 minutes, I press it once, I could wait 5 minutes, press it again, it'll be fine. I could hit it a million times between then. It doesn't matter because it has to be 5 minutes between. The idea of fixed is it's predictable.
Mhm.
Okay. The rat or whoever you are conditioning knows the rules.
Mhm.
Okay. I know how many times I pull the lever before I get food. I know how much time goes by before I get food or whatever reinforcer I'm using. Okay. But there's another layer to this. Okay. We can have ratio versus interval, which again, am I talking about number of behaviors performed? Or am I talking about time since that first behavior was performed? There's also an idea of fixed versus variable.
Mhm.
Fixed means the subject knows the rules, okay, or can at least learn the rules. It's predictable.
Mhm.
Again, every 5 times, every 5 minutes, whatever it is. There's another layer to this, though, and it can change, okay? When we talk about a variable reinforcement schedule, what that means is I have no idea. When I hit the lever, I don't know if it's going to reward me after I hit it 3 times or after I hit it 10 times. Okay, I have no idea how many times I have to pull the lever before I get the food pellet because it changes. Okay, when I provide that reinforcement changes. Okay, either the number of times I have to perform a behavior before I get reinforced changes or the amount of time that passes before I get the reinforcer changes. Okay, so you can have fixed ratio, you can have fixed interval, you can have variable ratio, and you can have variable interval.
Mhm.
Okay, they're all possible options of those two different layers of description, basically. So let's think about this for a moment, because one of the
Sure.
things that we do need to know is sort of the strength and the lasting power of these different types of reinforcement schedules. Like, how often will you respond based on them? And a lot of people memorize it, and there's a diagram, like a graph that will show it. And you can, if you want to just shove it in your head, cool. But I think it's easier to just put yourself in these shoes. Okay. So Mike, if you were thinking about reinforcement schedules,
I'm
okay,
there
I'm
with you.
curious, what are you going to respond to longer? A ratio schedule, right?
Mhm.
Or an interval schedule?
Mm, Probably ratio, because I know like I'm going to, if I, as long as I hit the number, I don't have to wait 10 minutes. I can just get the number right now. I'll just, oh, if I'd rather, if I know, right, if it's, oh, every five, I'm going to, if every five levers, I'm going to get the cheese versus 5 minutes. Well, let me just respond a whole bunch, behave a whole bunch, get it all now, and then just keep, I can get like five cheeses in before I have to wait for the 5 minutes. So I would be thinking ratio is probably what I'd respond to more versus interval.
Yes,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. Right. Especially like once you kind of learn, like if I press it once and that's all I do, and I get the cheese, and then I press it again later and I get the cheese right away, it's like,
Sure.
why? In my head, I'm like, I don't,
I don't have to
why would
wait.
I push it more times? Right.
Yeah.
Like, pushing it more times won't necessarily get me more food.
Hmm.
So like I'm going to push it once and wait a while and press it again. Like to me,
Hmm.
depending on the length of the interval, it's like, okay, well, I only need to press it whenever I
Yeah.
want the food, right?
Yeah.
But again, ratio, you could stock up, right? Just
Yeah.
press, 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 press. And that's
Yeah.
what we're asking. How will the volume of your responses change based on the schedules, right? What about fixed versus variable?
Mm.
What do you
So,
think?
so this one, I'm thinking like if things change, because like if I'm thinking, okay, if it was fixed ratio, because a weird thing like ratio, I'm definitely going to respond for. So let's stay in the ratio mind. Let's say the ratio was fixed and it was every five. That means every five lever pulls, bang, 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 cheese is going to come up. Every five lever pulls, bang, 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 cheese is going to come up. But let's say they stop the experiment, and then I pull it five times and then cheese doesn't come out. I might be thinking, oh, that was weird. Maybe it just broke one of those times. Let me just try one more time. Oh, it didn't come out again. Oh, okay, we're done. This cheese, there's no more cheese coming out. So I'm thinking, okay, with its fixed ratio, as soon as it stops, it's gonna probably gonna die really quick. But if it's variable ratio, I never know. I never know when the next cheese is gonna come. So because I can't predict it. So it could be like it used to be maybe it was like three, I get a cheese, but then maybe nine, I get the cheese. Because every time I pull it, because I don't know, I'll always think it's the next one that's going to come out. So I'm going to keep on pulling because I can't predict it, so I'll never know. So if we're talking about fixed versus variable, which one's going to cause me to do more responses? It's definitely going to be variable, right? Because I can't predict it anymore.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
that's actually gambling.
That's exactly what we're just.
When we think of why gambling can be so addictive, like biochemically in your brain, addictive, right? Not just like, oh, it's fun. No, like literally you don't know when that next rush of dopamine is going to come in.
Mhm.
It can be incredibly addictive, and people spend hours and days. Let's think slot machines, right? Because it's similar to our rat
Rat and lever.
reinforcer, right? A variable ratio schedule
Mhm.
means basically I have no idea how many times I have to hit this lever or hit this slot machine. I have no clue. I could
Mhm.
hit it and get the jackpot.
Mhm.
And then in theory, I could hit it one more time and get the jackpot again. Like there's no rules, right?
Mhm.
Like I have no idea. That uncertainty is so intoxicating, right? Like I
Mhm.
never know when I'm going to get the jackpot again. I'm just going to keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing. That uncertainty is very addictive, right? And you don't know when to stop because in theory,
It's
you
the
can
next
always
one.
be reinforced by the next one. Okay? And it's very hard to stop, and it's also very resistant to extinction. Okay? So that is like the variable ratio is a very powerful reinforcement schedule. Okay. You are likely to respond a lot of times, and it's not going to go extinct as fast, right? If we compare that to first fixed ratio, it's like, okay, I am still in ratio, right? Ratio is still better, right? And this, I think, would be the second strongest, in air quotes, type of reinforcement schedule. But I want to note a difference because I know, let's say I figure out I press the slot machine 5 times. Okay, I get the jackpot after 5. If I get the jackpot, I'm going to I'm gonna probably be done. Right? Like
Yeah.
either I'll keep going or like I get the jackpot. I'm like, actually, I've got a lot of money, right? Like,
Yeah.
do I want
Like,
to
I'm not
put
gonna get
more
to the
money
next
into
one.
this?
Yeah.
You could get up, walk around, maybe someone else will do it, and then I'll come in and hit the jackpot again. But like after my payout, I kind of reach this point where I'm like, am I good? Like, I know I won't get it for another couple lever presses. Do I need more right now? I don't know. Right? There's a brief pause
Mhm.
for you to eat the cheese or to collect your winnings before you would go and sit back down. Okay? So it's a little bit more um a little bit more likely to go extinct, right? Although it's still a pretty powerful number of responses. Okay? And there is some level of comfort in like, oh yeah, I know how many times I have to press it. Okay, when we think of a fixed interval,
Mhm.
okay, a fixed interval is going to be something that is, I know, right? If I hit the jackpot, there's a rule. 10 minutes have to go by before the jackpot can be won again. So I might hit the jackpot, go walk around, set a timer for 10 minutes, make sure I'm back in my seat to do it again. Okay, if I figured it out, that's going to be pretty enticing to me. Okay.
Right.
When we compare that to variable interval, you get the variable in there, but you don't know how much time goes by. So still the number of responses is pretty low. For interval in general, many or way fewer, I should say, responses for that uh, reinforcement behavior, right?
Right.
So
And that's why knowing these different schedules, like how if on the MCAT these are tested, right? We whenever we're like in a passage, right? I'm always kind of looking for these reinforcement schedules when I'm in a passage. If they are kind of giving me an experimental passage and they're saying, hey, the respondents got X thing after 20 minutes. I'm thinking interval. Okay, and now since it was every 20 minutes, oh, that's fixed interval. Because
mhm,
as soon as you see a reinforcement schedule, immediately I'm clocking, okay, what kind of schedule they're doing, because I can promise you there's probably going to be a
they're gonna
question on a very common question, or maybe something along the lines of, hey, they tell me the schedule, is this resistant to extinction? Well, if it's not variable ratio, might not be. Variable ratio is very resistant to extinction. And so
mhm,
these are the sorts of things to ask, and why it's important that when we see an experiment and they see a reinforcement schedule, is it a fixed number, or is it a time, and or sorry, is it a number of response of behaviors needed, or is it over a period of time, and is it fixed or is it variable? Clocking these things while you're reading, super super important, because I can promise you there's going to be a question about it.
yeah.
And so that's kind of like, we've talked about kind of the two main associative learnings when it comes to like conditioning. We've talked about classical conditioning. We've talked about operant conditioning. We've talked about, especially with the operant conditioning, about the reinforcement schedules and how they acquire that thing, and is that resistant or non-resistant to extinction. But those aren't the only types of learning, right, Molly? There's other kinds of learning as well. Hmm.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two other main types of learning that we talk about for an MCAT sense. There's observational learning, and then there's non-associative learning, right? And this is including kind of an umbrella category of habituation, dishabituation, sensitization, and desensitization. Okay, so there's a couple more concepts for us to discuss. Definitely associative learning. There is a lot of language and vocab terms associated with them, and they tend to be tested pretty frequently. Okay, the other two, I think, in comparison, are tested less frequently because there's less to learn about them. Okay, so like observational learning, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think that means just based on the word?
I'm using my big deductive skills right now, and so I'm thinking observing something. I'm just going on a limb, observing something.
Yes. Right. Probably, right? You're learning through observation. You're learning by watching, right, other people do stuff. And as the fifth of five kids, I want to tell you, I learned pretty much everything that I know about the world through observational learning,
Mhm.
right? You are basically just watching the people around you do stuff and deciding, do I want to do that? Yes. Okay. You're going to imitate it, right? Especially when you're young, though, right? Because we can learn through observational learning as adults, especially when you're young. You don't really have that layer of like, do I want to imitate this? You're probably just going to do it. Okay. Especially when you're little. So like if you're thinking about even learning how to speak, right? Learning how to communicate is kind of okay. I'm trying to parents are doing this or family members are doing this, I'm trying to do this. There's actually a really interesting connection to operant conditioning as well, of like reinforcement of like, oh, you happen to say dada. And everyone's like, oh my God, you get attention. And you're like, oh, okay, cool, good. That's reinforcing, right? I'm going to try and say dada again because I got a rush of attention. Attention was added. That attention is pleasant. I'm going to say it again. So learning how to speak is actually a really interesting learning behaviors and manners. It's very complex, right? But observational learning is literally just I watch you do that, I do what you do. Okay. It's a pretty simple idea. And I think the most common experiment that's brought up with this is the Bobo doll experiment, right? From Bandura. And it's basically this idea where kids were put in a separate room and they were watching, I believe through a one-way mirror, they were watching adults behave around this weird doll. It's like a clown doll shaped like a bowling pin. Super odd. It's like a balloon, basically. But the kids were like sitting down. They were in the experimental group, at least. They were watching adults behave around the doll. Okay. And sometimes the adults were neutral, or they were like polite to the doll. They were, keeping their distance, doing whatever, right? Generally positive like behaviors around the doll. When the kids were allowed to go and interact with the doll, they did something similar, right? There was also a condition where the adults were beating the doll and throwing it around and like absolutely abusing this creepy clown doll, the Bobo doll. And again, when you allow the kids to go and interact with the doll, of course, they're going to do what they just saw the adults do. Okay. And of course, there was a controlled trial where they just let the kids interact with them from the start, right? They didn't watch, they didn't experience the observational learning. And again, the behavior was very different. The kids did what the adults had done and what they had seen the adults done or do. So with observational learning, definitely Bobo doll experiment. It's not the most complicated to understand on the surface, but it is something we associate with it. It helped us understand this concept of observational learning. But I also think that mirror neurons are important to mention here, right? Mirror neurons are basically patterns of activation within the brain that mimic what you would experience if you were doing it. Okay, so if I watch someone beat up a Bobo doll, right, there are actually neural pathways that are activated as if while I'm watching, I am doing it. Okay, and there's a lot that you can kind of tease apart here. And there's actually been a lot of psych-soc passages about this, about, let's say, violence in movies and in video games. Like, does that train people to be more violent through observational learning? Is that a good thing or bad thing for society? There's a lot of layers to it. And I've seen multiple passages on this, on observational learning. Is this a dangerous thing to allow kids to watch violent movies or to play violent video games? Like, especially with mirror neuron activation, are we training those neural pathways? Like, are we reinforcing that pattern of activation through long-term potentiation, right? Like, am I basically training kids to do this by allowing them to see this stuff in media? So observational learning, it's pretty straightforward. Like, again, you learn through observation, but there's actually a lot there that you could unpack, especially ethical questions. And you bet you're going to see some passages on things just like that.
Yeah, on like kids watching something and like, okay, what should we do if we allow these kids to watch? What was the study when they saw these things? A lot of, well, yeah, like you said, the core idea is, I think, fairly straightforward. Lots of different applications of that core
Yeah.
idea, I think.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, now we've talked about the associative learnings and the observational learnings, but now let's talk about non-associative learning, which I think is a really, really cool one. And I'm going to be honest, non-associative learning, I did not understand it for the longest time. I remember I being so confused about the different ideas. Non-associative learning is this idea where we're not associating different stimuli or different things. But non-associative learning is we're getting a repeated stimuli, the same stimuli, and our response to that stimuli changes after repeated exposure. So this is the idea of non-associative learning. It's the same stimuli, but even though it's the same stimuli, because I'm seeing it over and over and over again, I'm changing how I respond to it. And there's kind of two ideas. Again, I mix these up so often, but there's kind
I
of
love this.
two main. I know when we talked about it, there's this great picture that you showed, and I hope maybe we can like put it up because that picture like was so helpful. But there's kind of two kind of responses after you are initially exposed to repeated stimuli, which is the idea of sensitization versus habituation. Now, say I get the same stimuli over and over again, maybe I start getting really sensitive to it. Like I'm getting it over and over again. Now I start feeling it more and more. I'm thinking like a great example would be like a scratchy sweater, right? Like at first when I put on this sweater, right? Like at first I didn't really feel it, but because I'm feeling it all the time, I'm feeling it's like driving me nuts because it's like scratching me over and over again. And I can feel a tag on it. It's like I can just feel it so much because I keep on getting exposed to it. So this is an idea of after repeated exposure to a stimuli, I become more sensitive to it. This is the idea of sensitization versus the idea of habituation, where maybe we have the same stimuli over and over again, but then I start feeling less sensitive to it. I get habituated to it. So a great example of this, especially in the medical context, like if you're used to like the beeping sounds of all like the machines, right? Where if you've been in a hospital, there's a lot of, machines that are beeping all the time, where at first you might hear these, but as soon as you kind of like continue work for a while, essentially they kind of just drown out. You kind of just forget that they exist. And I think initially these ideas, sensitization and habituation, I usually like, okay, I can comprehend what that means. But then it was these other terms that like once I think you explained these really well, Molly. The idea of desensitization and dehabituation.
Yes.
Mhm.
So if we were, and I'm going to kind of describe to you the diagram that I've seen on this that really helps.
Mhm.
Okay. Think of a stimulus. Okay. Think of a
Mhm.
siren. And I always think of a siren because I worked on the ambulance for a long time, but anything, any stimulus, it could be sweater, it could be the sounds of beeping in a hospital, it could be a siren, it could be lights flickering around you, right? Picture just like a normal response. If you hear a siren, a normal response is alarm and like, oh, wait, what? What's going on? Do I need to move? Is there a fire? What's going on? Right? That's a normal response. Okay. If it's a sweater, you put it on, a normal response is to probably kind of forget about it. Right? Like you don't really, okay, it's there. Cool. Right? So think about what a normal response is. Again, sensitization, we are now responding to this stimulus much more than is normal. Again, a sweater is not meant to like make you want to scratch your skin off, right? That's not normal, right? But also hearing a fire alarm doesn't mean you should start screaming and wailing and running in circles, right? Like, okay, like a fire alarm is going off. I should probably exit the building, right? Like sensitization, you are responding way more than is normal for that stimulus. Habituation, you are responding less. And again, think of fire alarm. I used to live for a brief period of my life in downtown LA. It was a like 20 something story building, and fire alarms went off every single night in the middle of the night for like a month. And like the first couple times, I would rub the sleep out of my eyes, get some jackets on, go downstairs, and there was never a fire. Like, okay, you know what? A couple times this happens, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not getting out of bed. If I light on fire, that's fine. Like, there's no fire. I don't
Wait,
believe it anymore. I
why is
become
this fire thing
habituated
going
to
on?
it. I
What?
don't believe it. I'm responding less than I should. Normally, you evacuate if you hear a fire alarm. I'm not doing it. Right. Same thing happened with my dorm building in college. People kept lighting the microwave on fire with popcorn. Come on, guys. You're getting a college education.
Classic.
Come on.
Classic.
But habituation and sensitization is changing response patterns from normal. When we talk about desensitization or dishabituation, what we're saying is we were sensitized or we were habituated, right? Responding more or less than is normal, respectively. Desensitization and dishabituation is coming back to the normal. Okay, so the thing that people struggle with is sensitization, you are responding more. Dishabituation, you are also responding more. Okay, that being said, they're different. Again, when you think of the sweater scratchiness, okay, like this is a very abnormal level of response, way more than is normal. Okay, versus if you think, okay, maybe I just went through that period, a month went by where there was a fire alarm every night, I'm not getting out of bed, right? Maybe a month goes by where there's no fire alarms and then I get another one. I'm like, oh, okay, you know what? It's been a while. I'm going to respond to it. Okay, I'm going to treat that fire alarm as a normal stimulus to respond to, I am becoming dishabituated. Notice that in responding to the fire alarm like normal, I am becoming more responsive to it, right? But I am coming back to what is normal. I am not going past what is normal into sensitization area. Okay, same thing with desensitization. Maybe you realize the sweater is itching you and you're scratching, you're clawing, and then after a while you kind of calm down and it kind of just comes back to like, okay, I'm wearing a sweater. Right? That's desensitization. Again, I am responding less than I was before. And that's the same thing that we see with habituation. And yet, habituation is going below normal and desensitization is coming back to the normal. Okay. Those terms I used to get mixed up constantly. I've explained these terms to students so many times in office hours of different types and in tutoring, right? Like they are so complicated. And yet, if you think about, are we responding more or less than is normal? And if I'm already more or less than normal and I'm coming back to it, in what direction am I moving? Okay, so I'm sensitized and then desensitized, or I'm habituated and dishabituated. Those are the kind of two pathways that we talk about. I would encourage you guys to draw this, right? The baseline response is the x-axis, right? That's like the normal amount of response to a particular stimulus or like a normal response. And then the y-axis is how are you responding? Like how intense is your response? Sensitization, you're going to see a positive slope line going above the x-axis. And then desensitization, you're going to come right back down. So negative slope line. You're basically making a diamond, right? Obviously, with habituation, you're going down, negative slope line below baseline, and then dishabituation, you're coming back up to the normal. So we can try and attach a diagram, but I want you guys to hear this and try and draw it for yourself, because I think that is the most helpful way to really nail down these terms, because they all are different. Even though there's similarities in the patterns, they're different, okay? Because it's all different compared to what is a normal response, quote unquote.
Quote unquote normal baseline response.
Yeah.
But yeah, amazing. And again, that non-associative learning, I said this already before, used to confuse me so much. So
Yeah,
what kind of
it is
realizing it's just kind
confusing.
of getting back to normal, because I was like, wait, what's the difference between sensitization and dehabituation? They're just getting more sensitive. It's all about, is it going away from baseline or is it going towards, which I think is such a good way to think about it. And so now that we've talked about like the different learning, we've talked about the two associative learnings, we've talked about observational, about non-associative learnings. It's really important that I think always bring it back to like, how do we see these things in a psych-soc passage? Because like we mentioned last week or last episode when we chatted about psych-soc strategy, in psych-soc passages, they aren't so overt. They are not going to say, oh, this is classical conditioning, or hey, this is operant conditioning. Oh, this is non-associative learning. They're going to present a scenario, and then we're supposed to deduce what kind of learning there is. Whereas in the sciences, they're much more a little bit heavy-handed when it talks about the topics. So part of this is we want to identify what kind of things when we see in a passage should cue us as to what's going on. So kind of like some main ones to think about. If you ever see stimuli getting paired to one another, immediately classical conditioning. If you ever see this stimulates with this thing, you're classically conditioned now. There's some sort of classical conditioning going on. Okay, we don't know what exactly, time to determine what's the condition or what's the neutral versus the unconditioned. But this is one thing where it's like, okay, classical conditioning is going on. If you ever see a reward or a punishment, like a behavior with a reward or punishment consequence, now you've got operant conditioning. Again, they're not going to say, hey, this is operant conditioning going on. They'll say, hey, the participants were rewarded or participants were punished, right? You see someone rewarded, punished, operant conditioning is going on, right? If you see something along the lines of like, yeah, schedules, extinction curves, like rates of extinction, and like, hey, we use different, I think I mentioned before about timelines or about different numbers. Now, we're talking about reinforcement schedules of operant conditioning, like how often are we reinforcing it, which changes how they learn it, which changes how it extinguishes. And then if you see anything about copying, like we saw that thing and now it was copied, and it's kind of like a monkey see, monkey do kind of deal, like, oh, this person did it. Doesn't even have to be a child. They could be adult respondents. A little bit less common, but a lot of the times it is a child, but it doesn't have to be. Then observational learnings happened. They saw the thing and they imitated the thing, even though like they hit the Bobo doll. They didn't have any actual reason to hit the Bobo doll. The reason they did it was just because they saw it. There was no conscious like, oh, I am mad at it now. It was just, I just saw it, so I'm going to do it. So if you see any kind of like copying, observational learning, but I think you put it wonderfully, Molly, when you talk about mirror neurons, because there's a little bit of neurobio in psych soc. Mirror neurons are absolutely an aspect, which is just part of observational learning. So if you see these things, we should already be cued, ready for these questions. Oh, they're going to probably be asking me something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like that lead by example with observational learning. Monkey see, monkey do. I like that. Yeah. And again, when we talk about learning and we talk about conditioning of different types, there's so many ways to apply this. Okay. This is not knowledge that you just stick in your brain and call it a day, right? Like this helps you understand the world around you. And it actually can help you with your studying. Okay. So there are lots of ways to hack it. We were talking about this. There are a couple key ways that we think of it, right? Number one, positive reinforcement. Just being aware of the behaviors that you reinforce in general. Okay. If you do something that is good, let's say you weren't really feeling like studying. Okay. There's two different ways you could respond to that. You could show up for yourself and say, you know what? I'm not feeling at my mental best, but I'm not going to be at my mental best when I take my test. I'm going to be stressed and I'm going to be tired, especially if I'm thinking about the later sections like psych soc, which is the fourth of four. I'm going to study anyways. Okay. If you push through that, you want to give yourself some positive reinforcement. Go get a sweet treat, right? Give yourself a little piece of candy. Do whatever you need to, right? Maybe you give yourself some time off to play video games or do whatever you want, right? Like
that's mine. That's mine.
Yeah, I know. Speaking is me, video games is Mike. Give yourself some positive reinforcement, right? You did a behavior that you want to reinforce. You continued to show up for yourself even when you didn't want to. Whereas, and I want to get an asterisk here, because sometimes if you're really exhausted, just give yourself a break, okay? But if I'm in this point where I'm like, I'm kind of tired, I could study, but I don't really want to. If you're like, you know what, I've had a hard week, I'm just gonna give myself a sweet treat anyway. Guess what you're reinforcing now, right? You got to just be aware of what you reinforce, okay? And what you punish as well. I want to be super clear. When you do practice questions, that is something you want to reinforce. Even if you get a score that doesn't make you so happy, don't punish yourself, right? Watch yourself talk there, because if you get a poor score on your practice questions and then you have this instinct of you are terrible, you're never going to get better, you are awful, and you're just like mentally abusing yourself, guess what you're never going to do again? Because guess what you have punished? What behavior you've punished? Practice questions. Okay, so just be aware of this. Okay, if you do practice questions and you struggle, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm going to give myself some negative reinforcement. Okay, that was tough. I'm going to give myself the rest of the day off. I'm going to go, just stare at the wall for a few minutes. Like I'm just going to give myself a little break.
Or something not stare
right.
at the wall.
Or you could give yourself a positive reinforcer as well, things that we talk about. But like you want to be really careful about the reinforcements and the punishments you give yourself, especially surrounding studying. Okay, because ultimately our goal is to be prioritizing and reinforcing our positive habits, and again, within reason, punishing our bad habits. Okay, again, sometimes if you are like down to your last brain cell, right? Or if sometimes life happens and you had a really traumatic thing happen, sometimes you just need to give yourself some grace. Okay, so if life happens and something terrible occurs and you need a break, that's not a bad habit. Okay, that's you responding to the world around you. Okay, but being aware of positive or being aware of reinforcements and punishments surrounding studying or not is really key. All right, that's all, of course, in the operant conditioning world. But even thinking about classical conditioning, I don't know about you, Mike. I love this because one of the things that actually we've talked about this before. We've done an episode on like what to do in the last 7 days leading up to your test. No tests at the time this episode is released for a couple months, but when you get there, go check it out. We talk about how ultimately in that last week, especially the last day or two, you should be doing a lot of resting, right? Go out, touch grass, see family, play some video games, eat a sweet treat, do whatever you need to do, because what you are doing is you are shifting your response to a stimulus. You are pairing an unconditioned stimulus, which is a sweet treat, which makes you happy, with the thoughts of taking the MCAT.
Mhm.
Okay. You are essentially retraining your response. You are presenting, shoot, I'm taking the MCAT tomorrow with, but I got a sweet treat. And you are essentially defusing your fear of the MCAT by classically conditioning an association there between sweet treat, yay, and I'm taking the MCAT tomorrow. Yay.
Yeah,
Part
I
of that
guess.
rest, you are using classical conditioning.
It's really cool. Like those
It's
those last few
cool.
days. Like I remember like those last few days I was reading, I was playing sports because I hadn't done those so much of that when I was in my studying, but I was still always thinking about like sitting down and actually taking this exam. In my mind, that was paired with calm, relaxing things I enjoyed. So that when on test day, I sat down with that, I was like, hey, I don't know, but I don't think I was stressed on test day. Like I remember sitting down and I remember thinking like, oh, this is fine for me. This is normal. This is not a super stressful situation because in my mind it was paired with things that were nice, things that were good, things that weren't so super stressful.
Yeah.
And of course, experiences may vary between each individual. The little one, right? Experiences may vary between
Commercial.
experience may vary. We can't promise the same classical conditioning outcome, but this is the idea where we don't want this exam to feel like this huge monster beast. So a way that we can do that is by pairing with things that are enjoyable, so it doesn't seem like this huge monster on test day.
Yes.
Another big thing, especially when it comes to studying, is utilizing some non-associative learning as well. We've talked about associative learning, about kind of pairing behaviors with consequences, certain stimuli with one another, with the pairing candy with or video games with exam day, but also non-associative learning we can use when we're actually taking our passages. A big one that we talked about before was habituating having the timer on when you're doing passages. A lot of us, when we're starting out our passages, the timer is super stressful. We're like, oh my goodness, I can't do passages with my timer on because so it just stresses me out. I focus on it too much because that's maybe our natural response to a timer. We get stressed. But then by just exposing yourself to it constantly, we get just used to the fact that, yeah, the timer's there, right? I'm just going to get used to having the timer there. I'm not super stressed anymore. And this is a lot of times where I think a lot of students don't, because they are so used to not doing the timer on test day when they have the timer on, they feel such a time pressure, even though they could even finish like 20 minutes early, yet still have a time pressure all the way through. They're like super stressed for time and they just make mistakes that they don't have. So a way that we can leverage that is having that timer on when you're doing a practice visit. And it's an easy thing, but one that I think is really, really powerful.
Yes. So we've talked about operant conditioning, we've talked about classical conditioning, we've talked about non-associative learning. I also think observational learning plays a role here. I specifically think of Reddit, which I love.
Love
Okay,
that.
I
Love
love I
Reddit.
love Reddit. I think it's awesome, and I think there are ways to use a subreddit like our MCAT in a positive way, but also just be aware, right? When you are constantly surrounded by people who think the MCAT is unfair or if they think it's a punishment, and you are, especially when you're new to the MCAT, if you surround yourself with people who just constantly trash it, okay? MCAT's unfair. This is terrible. This is the worst period of my life. This is awful. I hate this. You are through osmosis, or really through
Right.
observational learning, you are absorbing some of that energy. Like you are absorbing some of that behavior. Again, think mirror neurons. Like your mirror neurons can be activated by watching somebody else express opinions and express their behaviors, etc., right? I don't want you guys to train yourself to hate the test. Okay, so choosing to listen to podcasts from people who like the test, like you are right now, or choosing to, get close with friends that are also studying for the test, or, making new friends that are also studying for the test, getting to know classmates, etc., or coming to see us in some of our free classes, right? Like surround yourself with people who have things worth modeling after. Okay. If you've got some solid role models through observational learning in the realm of studying or education, it'll help a lot. Okay. If you surround yourself only with people that hate the world and hate the MCAT, keep in mind you're gonna have to take it anyway. Just because you hate it doesn't mean, and a med school's like, oh, okay, well, they hate it, so they don't have to take it. Right.
Of
You have
course.
to take it anyways. So you might as well diffuse that situation, right? Surround yourself with people who conduct themselves in a way that promotes a higher score and also a greater sense of well-being. And through observational learning, you may start to do the same. Okay, so all of these layers of learning, they all apply to you. You don't always have control over every layer of this, but I think being aware of these topics allows you to basically navigate the world in a more intentional way. It always comes back to intention. We almost
I knew we haven't
that
even said
word.
that. We didn't say the word yet all episode. And I was like, so happy that I was like, oh, how could we do an episode without saying the word intention, which is
I
the
know.
most
I feel
important
like
thing.
that's our like hidden Mickey. That's like our Easter egg. Every episode we say the word intention somewhere.
But yeah, and I mean, I think, when we are learning about, all these different learnings, I think a great way to be intentional about it is not only learning them to understand, but also learning them to apply to our own lives. In that way, again, really mimicking or echoing what we mentioned last episode about how to learn psych-social, when we can apply it to our own lives and actually implement it in our own lives using either what we've mentioned today or maybe get creative in some other ways that you do it, we not only learn it better, but can also benefit our lives, which is really, really great. And so, I mean, I think like after today, there's a lot that we could talk about when it comes to psych-soc. There's all these different subject areas, but one of, I think, the most important things I think a lot of students really want to hear about, and a lot of students really struggle with is data. Data interpretation is one thing that if there was like one of those things that over the last 5 years I hear, oh, I'm awful at this, I suck at this. It's one of the most common ones is data interpretation. And it really fits because data interpretation is a huge part of not only psychology and sociology, but all the science sections. It's super, super important. And so that's why I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about data interpretation, how to interpret data for the MCAT next episode, which is going to be super great. I hope everyone's excited to join us there because we're going to be going through kind of what to be looking for in data, how to break down data so that we can actually get what we need, and how to not get bogged down by data. Because there's a lot of things we want to be able to take away, but a lot of things where we have, remember, this is a timed exam. So how do we balance that? We're going to be doing all of that next episode. So stay tuned to check that out.
Yay, data interpretation. I'm very excited. Yes, we hope you guys are too. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening or whenever you're listening to this. Happy studying, and we hope to catch you again soon. Bye, everyone.